My name is Kurt, and I'm 53 years old. For the past 18 years, I've been both father and mother to my daughter Sarah after losing my wife Linda when Sarah was just 12. I worked 3 jobs, sacrificed my social life, and poured every ounce of love I had into raising that girl. I thought we had an unbreakable bond built on years of bedtime stories, school events, and quiet Sunday mornings over pancakes. But sometimes the people you love most can surprise you in ways that cut deeper than any stranger ever could. What happened at Sarah's rehearsal dinner changed everything between us, and what I did next shocked everyone at that table. Before I share what happened at that dinner table, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and please hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will show you exactly why. Standing up for yourself sometimes means making the hardest choices of your life. People always ask me how I managed to raise Sarah alone after Linda passed. The truth is, you don't really have a choice when cancer takes your wife and leaves you with a 12-year-old girl who still believes in fairy tales. Linda made me promise on her deathbed that I wouldn't let grief consume our family. Give Sarah the life she deserves, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hospital machines. So I made a decision that shaped the next decade and a half of my life. I would not remarry. I would not date. Every breath, every dollar, every moment of my existence would be dedicated to making sure Sarah never felt the absence of her mother. I was a construction worker by day, which meant my hands were always rough and my back constantly ached. But construction alone wouldn't cover private school tuition, dance classes, and all the things a growing girl needs. So I picked up a bartending job 3 nights a week at Murphy's Tavern downtown. The tips weren't great, but they paid for Sarah's school supplies and the occasional movie night. Weekends I drove delivery for a local restaurant chain, navigating through traffic with pizzas and Chinese food in my back seat, while Sarah was at sleepovers or study groups. Most fathers complain about missing their kids' events because of work. I rearranged my entire life to make sure I never missed a single parent-teacher conference, school play, or soccer game. I remember sitting in those tiny plastic chairs during Sarah's 3rd grade Christmas pageant, my knees practically touching my chin, but feeling like the proudest man in America when she sang her solo. Other parents would make small talk about vacation plans and summer camps, while I mentally calculated whether I could afford Sarah's new cleats. Teaching Sarah to drive was one of my favorite memories. She was 16 and terrified of my old pickup truck with its manual transmission. "Dad, this thing is ancient," she complained, but I saw the excitement in her eyes. We spent hours in empty parking lots, her hands white-knuckling the steering wheel, while I patiently explained the clutch. When she finally got it right and drove us smoothly around the block, she looked at me with such pure joy that I knew every sacrifice had been worth it. High school brought new challenges. Sarah was brilliant honor roll every semester, but she started noticing things I couldn't provide. Her friends had newer cars, designer clothes, family vacations to Europe. I watched her compare herself to classmates whose parents were doctors and lawyers, while I showed up to school events in my work boots and flannel shirts. But Sarah never complained. She worked part-time at a local bookstore and saved every penny for college. The day her scholarship acceptance letter arrived from State University, I cried in the bathroom like a baby. My little girl was going to have opportunities I could only dream of. College changed things between us, though I didn't want to admit it at first. Sarah's calls became less frequent, her visits shorter. She started using words I had to look up online and talking about professors and concepts that made me feel uneducated. When she brought Marcus home during sophomore year, I could immediately tell he came from money. His handshake was firm but soft, his teeth perfectly straight, his clothes expensive but understated. He was polite enough, but I caught him glancing around our small house with barely concealed surprise. Sarah seemed different around him, more refined somehow, like she was auditioning for a role in his world. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was heating up leftover pizza after a particularly brutal day, pouring concrete, when Sarah's voice rang through my phone, bubbling with excitement. "Dad Marcus proposed," she squealed, and I could hear the genuine happiness in her voice. Despite my reservations about the boy seeing Sarah, this joyful made my heart swell. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." I managed already mentally calculating what a wedding might cost. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in Chez Laurent, an upscale restaurant downtown, where the cheapest entree cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a week. Marcus had suggested we meet his parents to discuss wedding plans, and I had agreed, despite feeling completely out of my element. The hostess, a young woman with perfectly coiffed hair, led me through a dining room filled with crystal chandeliers and hushed conversations to a corner table where Sarah sat beside a woman who radiated old money confidence. Patricia Rothwell extended her hand with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Kurt. We've heard so much about you." Her husband William stood to shake my hand, his grip firm and assessing. Their son Marcus looked every inch his father's heir, comfortable and entitled in this world of white tablecloths and wine lists thicker than phone books. I felt my calloused hands and wondered if I should have worn something nicer than my best khakis and button-down shirt. The conversation started pleasantly enough, with Patricia complimenting Sarah's engagement ring and discussing potential venues. But it quickly became apparent that the Rothwells had very specific ideas about what constituted an appropriate wedding. "The Riverside Country Club has such beautiful gardens," Patricia suggested, her tone implying this was less a suggestion than an expectation. "Of course, the membership fee is substantial, but family traditions are so important." William nodded sagely while cutting his $70 steak. "We've been members there for 30 years. Married Patricia there myself. It's where the right people get married in this city." The emphasis on right people wasn't lost on me, though Sarah seemed oblivious to the subtle condescension. She was too busy absorbing every detail of their world, clearly eager to fit in. When the subject of finances came up, I felt my stomach tighten. "Of course, we'll handle the reception," William announced magnanimously. "Family business has been very good to us this year." Patricia smiled and added, "Though I'm sure we'll need to be mindful of budget constraints for some elements." Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, and I understood exactly what she meant. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and doing math I didn't want to do. My retirement savings account had exactly $47,000 money. I'd been carefully accumulating for 25 years. My house had enough equity for a second mortgage, though the thought made my chest tight with anxiety. But as I remembered Sarah's glowing face at dinner, talking animatedly about flower arrangements and reception bands, I knew what I had to do. The meeting with my loan officer, Jennifer Martinez, was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. "Mr. Anderson, are you certain about this decision?" she asked. Her brow furrowed with concern as she reviewed my application for a home equity loan. "This represents a significant portion of your net worth." I explained about Sarah's wedding, about wanting to give her the day she deserved, about promises I'd made to a dying wife. Jennifer approved the loan, but I caught her shaking her head sadly as I signed the papers. The rehearsal dinner venue required a deposit of $25,000, which I paid with a cashier's check that represented months of overtime shifts and weekends spent delivering food instead of resting my aching back. Sarah hugged me tightly when I told her I'd booked Marcello's, the elegant Italian restaurant she'd admired. "Dad, you're the best," she whispered, and for that moment, every sacrifice felt worthwhile. I didn't tell her about the second job I'd taken cleaning office buildings after my bartending shift ended, or about selling my truck and buying a 15-year-old Honda Civic to free up cash for her special day. The evening of the rehearsal dinner, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie of a suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. It was the first new suit I'd owned in over a decade, navy blue with a crisp white shirt that made me feel almost dignified. My hands shook slightly as I fumbled with the Windsor knot nerves and exhaustion from working 3 jobs finally catching up with me. But tonight was about Sarah, and I was determined to be the father she deserved, even if it meant pretending I belonged in the Rothwell's world. I arrived at Marcello's 30 minutes early, wanting everything to be perfect. The maitre d', a distinguished gentleman named Giuseppe, greeted me warmly and led me through the private dining room I'd reserved. Crystal glasses caught the light from elegant chandeliers, and fresh flowers adorned each table setting. The sight of it all made me proud and terrified simultaneously. This was what Sarah deserved, what Linda would have wanted for her daughter. Guests began arriving fashionably late, as wealthy people apparently do. Marcus's extended family filled the room with conversations about golf handicaps, wine collections, and summer houses. His cousin Bradley regaled a small group with stories about his recent trip to Tuscany, while his Aunt Margaret discussed her art collection with the kind of casual arrogance that comes from never worrying about money. I lingered near the bar, nursing a beer, and feeling increasingly invisible among these people who moved through the world with such easy confidence. Sarah made her entrance looking absolutely radiant in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. For a moment, watching her laugh and embrace Marcus's grandmother, I forgot about credit card bills and overtime shifts. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with algebra homework, now grown into a beautiful woman about to start her own family. The pride I felt was overwhelming even as I noticed how naturally she fit into this world that felt so foreign to me. Dinner conversation flowed around topics I could barely contribute to. William discussed real estate market trends, while Patricia shared gossip about families whose names I recognized from newspaper society pages. Marcus's cousin asked me about my business ventures, clearly assuming that anyone paying for events at Marcello's must be financially successful. When I explained that I worked construction, the momentary silence was deafening. "How fascinating," Patricia said, with the kind of tone reserved for discussing unusual insects. "Manual labor is so honest." The microaggressions were subtle but relentless. Comments about my pronunciation of certain words raised eyebrows when I mentioned shopping at Walmart. Gentle corrections about wine terminology that made me feel like a child being educated. Sarah, caught between 2 worlds, began showing signs of embarrassment about her father's blue-collar background. I watched her cringe slightly when I used my dinner napkin incorrectly, and saw her exchange glances with Marcus when I mentioned my weekend delivery job. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated at my end of the table. Conversations about private school memories and exclusive club memberships swirled around me, while I sat quietly, occasionally attempting to share stories about raising Sarah that were met with polite but dismissive nods. The Rothwells had perfected the art of making someone feel unwelcome without saying anything directly offensive, and I was definitely not welcome in their world, despite paying for the privilege of sitting at their table. The conversation that would change everything started innocuously enough. William was holding court at his end of the table, wine glass in hand, discussing what he called the importance of good breeding in business success. Marcus gets his entrepreneurial instincts from generations of Rothwell men, he proclaimed, as if genetic superiority was a scientific fact. It's remarkable how traits pass down through bloodlines. Patricia nodded enthusiastically, her third glass of Chardonnay making her even more verbose than usual. Absolutely true. You can always tell good family stock by looking at the children. Intelligence, refinement, business, acumen. It all comes through the genes. She gestured dramatically toward Marcus, who basked in his mother's praise like a plant receiving sunlight. Bradley, Marcus's cousin, jumped into the conversation with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found his favorite topic. It's fascinating, really. I was just reading about how successful families tend to produce successful children. Something about inherited drive and natural leadership qualities. The table murmured agreement, everyone apparently eager to discuss their own genetic superiority. That's when Margaret, Marcus's great-aunt, turned toward Sarah with a mischievous smile. Speaking of inherited traits, Sarah, dear, what wonderful qualities did you inherit from your father? The question was posed with the casual cruelty that wealthy people mistake for humor, and I felt every muscle in my body tense as the entire table turned expectant eyes toward my daughter. Sarah's face flushed slightly, and she glanced quickly in my direction before looking away. The pause stretched uncomfortably, long filled only by the gentle clinking of silverware and the distant sound of kitchen activity. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a forced lightness that didn't match the tension in her shoulders. "Oh, Kurt," she said, and my heart stopped at the casual dismissal in her tone. "He's basically just the sperm donor. Marcus is more like real family now." The table erupted in delighted laughter, as if Sarah had delivered the punchline to the evening's best joke. Patricia actually applauded her voice, cutting through the merriment. "Oh my goodness, Sarah, you're absolutely terrible, but how funny!" William chuckled and raised his wine glass in mock salute while Bradley nearly choked on his drink from laughing so hard. Even the normally reserved Margaret was wiping tears from her eyes. Marcus grinned widely and squeezed Sarah's hand approvingly. "Well, genes aren't everything, right?" he added, triggering another wave of laughter from his family. "Besides, we're upgrading her family tree now." The comment sent the table into fresh hysterics, with several guests sharing similar stories about leaving their humble origins behind for better circumstances. But I wasn't laughing. I sat frozen in my chair, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and torn out my heart with their bare hands. The words sperm donor echoed in my mind, drowning out the continued merriment around me. 18 years of sacrifice, of working 3 jobs, of choosing Sarah's happiness over my own every single day, reduced to a crude biological function that any stranger could have performed. Memories flooded through me with painful clarity. Sitting up all night when Sarah had pneumonia at age 14, holding her fevered body, and praying to God she would be okay. Teaching her to drive stick shift in my old pickup truck, patiently explaining the clutch for the 100th time. Walking the floors with her during high school heartbreaks, making hot chocolate, and listening to her cry about boys who didn't deserve her tears. Working Christmas Eve delivery shifts so she could have the laptop she wanted for college. Every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference where I showed up in my work clothes because I'd come straight from a construction site. The laughter continued around me, but I felt completely detached from the scene, as if I were watching it happen to someone else. Sarah was still smiling, basking in the approval of Marcus's family, apparently oblivious to the fact that she'd just publicly disowned the man who'd given up everything to raise her. The betrayal was so complete, so casual, that I struggled to process it. This was the daughter I'd loved unconditionally, defended fiercely, and sacrificed everything for, and she'd just reduced me to genetic material in front of strangers. I excused myself quietly from the table, my voice barely audible above the ongoing conversation about family bloodlines and inherited superiority. No one seemed to notice my departure, except the waiter who asked if I needed assistance as I made my way toward the restroom on unsteady legs. I locked the bathroom door behind me and stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror, seeing a 53-year-old man whose daughter had just announced to a room full of people that he meant nothing to her. But as I stood there, something shifted inside me. The initial shock and pain began crystallizing into something else entirely. Clarity. For the first time in years, I saw the situation with perfect brutal honesty. I had been buying my daughter's affection, allowing myself to be used and disrespected, all while convincing myself it was love. The woman sitting at that table wasn't the grateful child I'd imagined. She was someone who could casually dismiss 18 years of devotion for social acceptance, someone who valued her new family's approval more than her father's dignity. I pulled out my phone and made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. When I returned to the table, my composure was perfect. The conversation had moved on to summer vacation plans with Marcus, describing his family's annual trip to Martha's Vineyard, while Sarah listened with rapt attention. I slipped back into my seat unnoticed and calmly pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. "Marcello's restaurant. This is Giuseppe speaking," came the familiar voice of the maitre d', who had greeted me so warmly earlier in the evening. I spoke quietly, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Giuseppe, this is Kurt Anderson. I need to cancel tomorrow night's rehearsal dinner reservation for 50 people." There was a pause, then confusion in Giuseppe's voice. "Mr. Anderson?" "But sir, that's less than 24 hours' notice. The deposit, the preparations we've already ordered, the flowers, the special menu items," I cut him off gently. "I understand completely. Please cancel everything and send me the bill for any cancellation fees. I'll handle all the financial consequences." While the Rothwells continued their animated discussion about yacht clubs and wine tastings, I made my second call. "Bella Flora Designs." "This is Amanda," answered the florist who'd spent weeks designing elaborate centerpieces for tomorrow's event. "Amanda, this is Kurt Anderson. I need to cancel the floral arrangements for the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night at Marcello's." The shock in her voice was evident. "Mr. Anderson, we've already created the arrangements. They're absolutely beautiful. The cancellation fee would be substantial." I assured her I would pay whatever was required and to please donate the flowers to a local nursing home. My third call was to Premier Catering Services, the company I'd hired to provide additional appetizers and champagne service beyond what Marcello's offered. "This is unexpected, Mr. Anderson," the catering manager said when I explained my request. "Our team is already prepared ingredients, purchased, staff scheduled. The financial penalty for this late cancellation," I interrupted politely. "Send me the complete bill. I'll pay in full." The fourth call went to Elegant Transportation, where I'd arranged limousine service for the wedding party. "Sir, our driver is already scheduled, the vehicle detailed and prepared," the dispatcher explained. "Cancelling now means you'll forfeit the entire fee plus a penalty." I confirmed that I understood and accepted all financial consequences, asking only that they not charge the couple for services they wouldn't receive. Sarah finally noticed my phone activity during my fifth call, glancing over with mild curiosity while I spoke to Classic Events Planning. Dad, who are you calling? She asked, though her attention remained primarily focused on Patricia's story about her recent charity gala. I smiled at her reassuringly. Just handling some business details, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. My final call was to the wedding planner, Christina Walsh, who had coordinated every detail of tomorrow's elaborate celebration. Mr. Anderson, this is absolutely unprecedented, she said, her voice rising with panic. The rehearsal dinner is in 18 hours. We have vendors arriving, staff, scheduled decorations being delivered. The financial implications alone. I remained calm and professional. Christina, please cancel every service, every vendor, every detail that I'm paying for. Send all cancellation fees and penalties to my address. I want everything stopped immediately. By now, several people at the table had noticed my phone calls, though they continued their conversation about summer house renovations while shooting occasional glances in my direction. Patricia looked mildly concerned and asked, "Is everything all right, Kurt? You seem to be conducting quite a bit of business during dinner." I carefully placed my phone back in my jacket pocket, straightened my tie, and stood up slowly. The entire table gradually fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Actually, Patricia, everything is absolutely perfect, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet dining room. In fact, I have a rather important announcement to make. The last traces of laughter faded from the table as all eyes focused on me. Sarah's face showed the first hint of concern, though she still had no idea what was coming. Marcus looked annoyed at the interruption, while his family displayed the polite but impatient expressions of people accustomed to being the center of attention. Since I've apparently been reduced to the role of sperm donor in this family, I began, my voice steady and conversational. I figured that actual fathers are the ones who should handle wedding expenses. The color began draining from Sarah's face as understanding dawned, but I continued with devastating calm. I've just spent the last 10 minutes canceling tomorrow night's rehearsal dinner that I was paying for. The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that elegant dining room as the full implications of what I'd just said sank in. Sarah's face had gone completely white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "What do you mean, cancelled?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I began listing each cancellation with the methodical precision of a man reading a grocery list. The venue reservation at Marcello's for 50 people cancelled. The floral arrangements from Bella Flora Designs cancelled. The additional catering services cancelled. The limousine transportation for the wedding party cancelled. The complete event coordination services cancelled. Each item hit the table like a physical blow, and I watched the color drain from more faces with every word. The total cost was $47,000. I continued, my voice remaining conversational, despite the growing panic around me. Since Marcus is more like real family now, I'm sure the Rothwell clan can handle the expenses that actual fathers typically cover. The mathematical precision of my revenge was beautiful in its simplicity. Every dollar I'd sacrificed, every overtime shift I'd worked, every weekend I'd spent delivering food instead of resting all of it, now laid bare for these people who'd spent the evening mocking my blue-collar existence. Patricia immediately grabbed her phone, her manicured fingers shaking as she dialed. "Giuseppe, this is Patricia Rothwell. There seems to be some confusion about tomorrow night's event." I could hear Giuseppe's voice through the phone confirming that yes, the cancellation was complete, and yes, all vendors had been notified. The horror on Patricia's face was almost comical as reality set in. Sarah burst into tears, reaching across the table toward me with desperate hands. "Dad, I was just joking, I didn't mean it. Please, you can't do this. Her mascara began running down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. 18 years of raising you alone wasn't a joke to me, Sarah, I replied calmly. Working 3 jobs so you could go to college wasn't a joke. Selling my truck to pay for your wedding wasn't a joke. Marcus stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This is completely ridiculous. It was just a comment. You can't destroy an entire event over a stupid joke. His entitled outrage was exactly what I'd expected from someone who'd never worked for anything in his life. I looked him directly in the eyes and smiled. You're absolutely right, Marcus. It was just a comment. Just like my financial contribution to your family was just money. William attempted to take control of the situation, his businessman instincts kicking in. Now, Kurt, let's be reasonable about this. I'm sure we can work something out. The cost to replicate tomorrow night's arrangements on such short notice will be astronomical. I nodded sympathetically. I'm sure it will be. Fortunately, that's no longer my problem to solve. The panic was spreading around the table like wildfire. Bradley was frantically calling his wife to see if their club could accommodate 50 people with 18 hours' notice. Margaret was asking about family connections at other restaurants, while Marcus's younger sister tried to comfort Sarah, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. You're destroying Sarah's happiness out of spite. Patricia accused her composure, finally cracking. What kind of father does that to his own daughter? The irony of her question wasn't lost on me. The kind of father who spent 25 years teaching her to respect the people who sacrifice for her, I answered. Clearly, I failed in that lesson. The chaos continued to escalate as more phone calls were made, and the true scope of the crisis became apparent. No decent venue had availability on such short notice. The specialized linens, flowers, and catering arrangements I'd ordered months in advance were impossible to replicate overnight. The elaborate menu Giuseppe had planned specifically for our event was already in preparation and couldn't be transferred to another location. Sarah grabbed my arm, her tears flowing freely. Please, Dad. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. Please don't ruin my rehearsal dinner. But her apology felt hollow, motivated by consequences rather than genuine remorse. I'm not ruining anything, Sarah, I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. I'm simply stepping back and letting your real family handle things. I reached into my wallet and placed a $50 bill on the table to cover my portion of dinner, then stood to leave. I wish you all the best in resolving tomorrow's situation, I said politely. I'm sure the Rothwell family resources will prove more than adequate for such a simple challenge. The sarcasm in my voice was unmistakable, but delivered with such courtesy that it couldn't be directly challenged. As I walked toward the exit, I could hear the escalating panic behind me. Voices raised in argument, phones ringing constantly. Sarah's continued sobbing, mixing with increasingly desperate attempts to find alternative arrangements. The sound of their chaos followed me through Marcello's elegant dining room, past Giuseppe's concerned expression, and out into the cool night air, where my 15-year-old Honda Civic waited in the parking lot like a faithful friend. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The drive home that night was surreal. I sat at red lights, replaying the evening's events, feeling a strange mixture of devastation and liberation coursing through my veins. The radio played classic rock songs from my youth, and for the first time in years, I actually listened to the music instead of mentally calculating bills or work schedules. Something fundamental had shifted inside me, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had suddenly been lifted from my shoulders. My phone started ringing before I even reached my driveway. Sarah's ringtone played over and over, but I let it go to voicemail. Then Marcus called, followed by Patricia, then William. By the time I walked into my empty house, I had 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey I'd been saving for Sarah's wedding day and sat in my favorite armchair, finally ready to listen to the voicemails. Sarah's first message was pure hysteria. "Dad, please call me back. Please, we need to fix this. I'm so sorry about what I said. I didn't mean it. Please don't do this to me." Her subsequent messages grew increasingly desperate, punctuated by crying and pleading that would have broken my heart just hours earlier. But something had fundamentally changed in me during that dinner, and her tears no longer had the power to override my sense of self-respect. Marcus's voicemails were predictably entitled and demanding. "Kurt, this is Marcus. You need to call me immediately and fix this situation. This is completely unacceptable behavior. Sarah is devastated, and frankly, I'm disgusted by your childish response to a harmless joke." His tone suggested he viewed me as an employee who'd forgotten his place rather than the father of his bride. The Rothwell family messages were masterpieces of passive-aggressive manipulation. Patricia's voice dripped with false concern. "Kurt, I'm sure you're upset, but surely we can resolve this like adults. Think about Sarah's happiness. Think about how this affects her special day." William was more direct. "This is business suicide, Kurt. Nobody respects a man who can't take a joke. Call me and we'll sort this out professionally." Over the next 3 days, the calls continued relentlessly. Sarah camped outside my house twice, pounding on the door and begging me to reconsider. Marcus's family apparently scrambled to arrange a replacement event, but the best they could manage on short notice was a small private room at a chain restaurant with basic catering and no decorations. The elegant celebration I'd spent months planning and financing became a hasty gathering that reflected their actual willingness to invest in Sarah's happiness when their own money was at stake. But the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. My phone rang Thursday evening with a number I didn't recognize, and I answered to hear Giuseppe's familiar voice. "Mr. Anderson, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted you to know that in 30 years of restaurant management, I have never seen such a perfectly executed response to disrespect. That young lady learned a valuable lesson about consequences, and frankly, her future in-laws needed to understand that their money doesn't make them better than hard-working people like yourself." Giuseppe's words meant more to me than he could have known. Here was a man who dealt with wealthy, entitled people every day, and he recognized what I'd done as justice rather than spite. "You showed more class in your response than they showed in their behavior," he continued. "I want you to know that your deposit will be fully refunded, and you're welcome in my restaurant anytime." That weekend, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I used the money I'd saved from the wedding cancellations to book a fishing trip to Montana, something I'd been dreaming about for 20 years, but never allowed myself to afford. The irony wasn't lost on me that Sarah's betrayal had accidentally given me the financial freedom to do something purely for my own enjoyment. The trip was revelation. Sitting by a crystal-clear mountain lake, casting lines with 3 other men who'd also raised children and understood sacrifice, I began to see my situation with clarity I'd never possessed before. Tom, a retired teacher from Denver, listened to my story and shook his head knowingly. "Son, you didn't raise a daughter. You raised a customer. There's a difference between loving someone and buying their affection." His words hit me like a physical blow because they were absolutely true. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Sarah's father and become her financial enabler. Every sacrifice I'd made, every extra shift I'd worked, every dollar I'd spent, had been motivated by fear that she wouldn't love me enough if I couldn't provide everything she wanted. I'd confused being needed with being loved, and Sarah had learned to exploit that confusion with devastating effectiveness. When I returned from Montana, I found my voicemail full of messages, but this time they were different. Sarah's voice had changed from hysterical to reflective. "Dad, I've been thinking about what happened, and I realize I hurt you terribly. Can we please talk? I want to understand why you did what you did." For the first time since the rehearsal dinner, her words sounded genuine rather than manipulative. I called her back and suggested we meet at the small diner where we'd shared countless meals during her childhood. The Sarah who walked through those doors was different from the woman I'd seen at Marcello's. She looked tired, humbled, and genuinely remorseful in a way that seemed to come from understanding rather than desperation. "Dad, I need to apologize." She began, her voice steady, despite the tears in her eyes. "Not just for what I said at dinner, but for how I've been treating you for years. I got so caught up in trying to fit into Marcus's world that I forgot where I came from. I forgot the man who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities his generation never had." She reached across the table and took my weathered hands in her soft ones. "I forgot that you're not just my father. You're my hero." We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, really talked for the first time in years. Sarah admitted that Marcus's family had made her feel ashamed of her background, and she'd been overcompensating by distancing herself from anything that reminded them of her humble origins. She told me about the pressure she felt to prove herself worthy of their acceptance, and how my blue-collar honesty made her feel exposed and vulnerable in their presence. "I realize now that I was trying to erase the parts of myself that I should have been most proud of," she said, tears flowing freely. "Your work ethic, your integrity, your willingness to sacrifice for family. Those are the best parts of who I am. And I threw them away, trying to impress people who will never respect me anyway." The conversation wasn't easy. I had to be honest about how her betrayal had affected me, how years of being taken for granted had worn down my self-respect until I barely recognized the man I'd become. "Sarah, I love you more than life itself, but I won't be anyone's ATM anymore. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on mutual respect, not financial dependency." She agreed immediately, and more importantly, she followed through. Over the following weeks, Sarah began setting boundaries with Marcus's family, defending her father when they made their subtle digs about blue-collar people. She insisted that they acknowledge my role in her success and show proper respect for the sacrifices that had made her education and opportunities possible. The wedding, when it finally happened 6 months later, was a much smaller affair. Gone were the pretentious floral arrangements and elaborate catering. Instead, we held the ceremony in the same church where Linda and I had married, followed by a reception at the local community center, where Sarah had attended Girl Scout meetings as a child. I walked her down the aisle, wearing the same navy suit from the rehearsal dinner, and when she squeezed my arm and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Dad," I knew we'd found our way back to each other. During her reception speech, Sarah surprised everyone by publicly acknowledging my sacrifices. "My father worked 3 jobs to put me through college," she announced, looking directly at the Rothwell family. "He taught me that love isn't measured in dollars spent, but in time sacrificed and dreams deferred. He's the strongest, most honorable man I know, and I'm proud to be his daughter." The applause was thunderous, and I saw several of Marcus's relatives wipe away tears. Marcus, to his credit, eventually apologized for his family's behavior and made genuine efforts to build a relationship with me. He admitted that their wealth had made them blind to the value of honest work and real sacrifice. "I never understood what it meant to earn something until I met you," he told me during one of our fishing trips. "My family gave me everything, but you gave Sarah something much more valuable. You gave her character." Looking back now, I realize that canceling the rehearsal dinner was the best thing I ever did for both Sarah and myself. It forced us to confront the toxic dynamic we'd fallen into and rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial obligation. I learned to love my daughter without trying to buy her affection, and she learned to value the man who'd raised her rather than being ashamed of his humble circumstances. The most important lesson I learned was that demanding respect isn't selfish, it's necessary. For years, I'd convinced myself that accepting disrespect was part of loving someone unconditionally. But real love requires honesty, and sometimes honesty means standing up for yourself even when it hurts the people you love most. True family isn't about blood or money or social status. It's about people who value each other enough to treat each other with dignity, even when nobody else is watching. Today, Sarah and I have the relationship I always dreamed of, built on genuine affection rather than guilt or obligation. She calls not because she needs money, but because she wants to share her life with the man who helped shape her into the woman she became. And when my future grandchildren ask about their grandfather, they'll hear stories about a man who worked hard, loved deeply, and never compromised his dignity for anyone's approval, not even his own daughter's. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to accept anything less than you deserve, even from the people you'd die for. That's a lesson worth $47,000 and a cancelled dinner party. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your self-respect, even when it meant disappointing someone you loved? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life lessons about standing up for yourself. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by how much they're willing to sacrifice their dignity. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the strongest relationships. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and never forget that respect starts with respecting yourself.